Hello everyone and welcome to the Neo Model Railway. Now I feel I can confidently say that every model railway enthusiast and his dog has at some point had experience with ballasting track. That is, apart from me. Regular viewers will know that I like to lay down my plan at the beginning of each video, so let's talk about that first. Now I have in my possession a rather old tub of Woodland Scenics fine grey ballast. I also have in my possession a smaller bag of Hornby's grey ballast. Now I'm very much of the mind that actually the scale of these two is a little bit too small for my layout in 00 gauge, but because I've had this for so long and because I hate waste, this is what I'm going to be using. I think what I'll be doing is I'll actually be mixing the two together. I might use the fine stuff right along what we might call the main line of track, but mix in the others for the sidings and the shunting areas. In terms of adhesive, I have a small bottle of Ballast Bond. Again, I've had this for quite a while. I wouldn't normally use this, but being as I have it in stock, that's what I'll be making use of. As many of you know, you can of course just use standard PVA mixed with a bit of water just to loosen things up. Obviously these specialist products do cost a little bit more, but they are specialist for a reason. So it says that this one will dry slightly quicker than standard PVA. It's already mixed to the right consistency and it will dry in a matte finish. Sometimes PVA can dry with a slight white hue to it, a bit of opacity, which we don't really want. Although I'm going to be weathering the ballast and track later on anyway, so I don't think it really matters. So what are the steps I'm going to take? Well, without teaching Granny how to suck eggs, basically I'm going to be pouring the ballast between the rails and then I'm going to be binding it together with some glue. It's that simple. The only area I'm a little bit concerned about obviously is the points, and I think what I'll do is handle all the straight areas first, make sure that's all bedded in and gone off, then I can hoover up any excess material before I tackle those intricate points. And for those, I think I will simply just protect them with a little bit of blue tack or some sort of similar material, and then I can just very carefully get between each of those rails, making sure I don't damage any of the metal parts. So I've got ballast, I've got glue, it's time to give it a go. I'm going to start in this corner here with these three almost straight rails, and I'm going to go right into this corner here. I haven't decided what I'm going to be doing with this corner, that will come in a future video. My intention was always to run the ballast right across all of these rails and almost up to the rock face. I think I will leave a little gap along the back because I want to add some soil and vegetation, but if you can imagine all of the ballast running parallel along these three, I think this is a great place to start. With that in mind, I had said a minute ago that I'll be using the fine ballast along the main line, which is this main track that runs right down the middle. However, I think what I am going to do is mix them both together and just keep things consistent across the layout. So this is Hornby's Scale Scenics range R7165 grey ballast. It's a decent enough size, probably hard to see on camera, but it is slightly larger than the Scenics version that I have in fine. And this really is quite fine. I think this would be absolutely perfect for N gauge, but potentially just a little bit too small for 00. That's why I think I'm just going to mix them up, probably 50-50, and just see how things go. Right, let me mix them up and start to get things onto the layout. Now this isn't rocket science. I'm just going to grab a couple of spoons of the fine and a couple of spoons of the medium. Now I have actually no idea how far this amount of ballast will go. Now all said and done, I'm very happy with that. I think that mix is actually better than if I had left things as they were straight out of the bag. Now, taking my time, filling just lightly, I will brush this through. I'll just run it to the end of the join. I haven't decided what I'm going to do around the buffer stops yet. My model railway adventure started quite literally with the purchase of this fine ballast some 8 years ago, and I'm finally getting around to using it. Right, just mind those points. I will brush all this into position shortly, but for now I do want to get some on the ends as well, or rather on the outside of the rails. possibly got too much in the middle. So what I'm going to do, come along the ends, create that shoulder that we're all looking for, which will naturally occur given that I've placed the track on cork anyway. Now what I'll do is I'll give the track a brush, and then I'm going to give it a tap as well with the back of the spoon. This is only a first pass, so I'm not too worried if it's not perfect. Right, the next step is to get my trusty 1-inch brush, which is lovely and soft, and get all of the ballast mounded up and into position. I want it to be perfect before I start dropping on the glue. So it turns out I used potentially way more than I needed. But that's fine because I'm brushing it down and it's going off the sides and creating that kind of natural shoulder that we're looking for. Just doing this lightly. This stuff is really quite fine. I hadn't really appreciated how light ballast is, having never worked with it before. I haven't decided how I'm going to tackle the buffer stops just yet. I think I just need to take my time and just be a little bit careful. I think this brush is obviously just way too big, so I'm going to dig out something a bit smaller so I can finesse around this area. But otherwise, I'm generally happy with how this is turning out. I'm going to just give this one final pass over. I need a little bit more down this back edge here, and then make sure everything is perfect, get as much off of the sleepers as possible, and then I think I'm ready to drop on some glue. There are some gaps between the rails, and I was going to fill that in with ballast, but I do need some more ballast to do that, so time to shake it up. Now, who says you can't have fun while making videos? So now I'm just carefully working around the buffer stops, taking my time, smaller brush. I suspect I'm never going to get this spot perfect. And also part of the issue is that I don't actually know how I'm going to finish the end of the scene here. I think what I will do is have some sort of brick wall feature, like a retaining wall going into the tunnel mouth here. But that's still very much just an idea in my mind. I have to think all the way back to the kind of sketch drawing I did much earlier on in the project, much earlier on in the year. And we'll return back to that and just see whether that idea is still valid, still has legs. So I'm just making sure all of the ballast is kind of evenly distributed. I don't really want any of the cork showing through, and equally I don't want any sort of big lumps. I haven't yet decided what I'm doing in this kind of quadrant. I think I always had grass and vegetation, possibly a small hut. And I know that between the rails it's going to be obviously muck and grime and weeds. So again, if I just get this foundation correct, and then everything else should come after. Okay, time for a light tapping. Irritating as this is, I apologise. But it does seem to be working in terms of just levelling everything out where I've got uneven patches. Now there are a few areas where you can see the edge of the cork now poking through, so I'm just going to touch those up with a little bit more ballast. I might slowly move things back to recreate that shoulder, and then I think I'm ready for some glue. Close inspection of the track shows that there's very little ballast on the actual sleepers themselves, and that's exactly the effect I'm looking for. The shoulder is good, there's no cork poking through. There's a little bit of touching up to do around these buffer stops, and I will get to that just before I put the adhesive on, but I would say that's looking pretty good. Let's get sticking. So first things first, I'm going to give everything a very light, fine spray. Obviously make sure all the electrics on your layout is off before you do this. I just want to wet the ballast and the track just to make sure that the actual glue seeps in nicely. Now, I believe you can do this with alcohol, and alcohol will obviously dry or evaporate much more quickly, but I don't have any to hand, so water will be fine. Now it's time for a bit of ballast bond. Now, as I said, you can use PVA just watered down, but I've got this in stock, so let's give it a go. All I need to do is take the cap off and get dripping. I've completed the sidings now, and the next piece I want to do is this long mainline piece right up to this first point. So I'm going to get the ballast into here, then let everything dry, and then it will be a case of coming back, protecting these points with some sort of blue tack or plasticine, and then finishing these later on. So this is where I am then. I've completed all of the straight areas, and all that's left to do is to fill in the gaps right around these points. I have actually already tackled this one here, and I did use a different approach to the approach that I said I'd use at the beginning. I actually decided not to use any blue tack in the end, and instead just be very careful with neat PVA glue. So with 4 more points to get on with, I think I'm going to follow the same pattern. So for this, I'm just going to use a fine brush to get the PVA between each of these sleepers, and then I'm going to sprinkle on the ballast with my fingers. Now the glue's in place, it's just a case of being very gentle and just dropping in just enough and making sure that I don't get too much of it in places I don't really want it. The reason I'm doing this instead of my original plan of kind of covering the points to protect them is because I've realised that I need to be able to check that the points actually work, and it's better to do that when everything's wet and I can make adjustments than it is to do it, let it dry, and then realise I've made a mistake and I've glued up all my points. I did see a useful tip on YouTube from that model railway guy, and he uses sticky back plastic or tape underneath his points and then just lays the points on top and then puts the ballast on top of that, and it seems to work really well. So that might be something to consider if you haven't already laid your track. I have, so I'm using the tried and tested glue technique. I just want to give this a very light brush. There will be a touch of PVA on the tops. So if I can just very gently move this around. Now I do have a little bit of glue on the inside of the rail there. I can clean that. I don't want to move it around too much for risk of getting it underneath the actual rails. The sides are okay. I've obviously left a gap around the tie bar so this can move backwards and forwards. And all this will be weathered in, so if there are any gaps, such as just between here, then I can resolve these later on with a bit of weathering, and I don't think you'll see it. Okay, that seems to be working okay. We've got movement. I'm just going to clean off as much of that as possible on the insides. So with my initial test completed and the second one in the bag, I've got 3 more to do. I'm going to take my time on these because I really do not want to make a mistake, and I'll bring you back in for the final reveal. So finally, after 8 years, I have ballasted some track. It's interesting for me to think back at how this whole journey started. 8 years ago, I bought myself 4 cardboard Metcalf kits and a tub of this fine ballast. And here I am, finally, 8 years on, with a layout which is in production, and I'm loving it. So let's finish up then with a quick look down at the board in detail, and I'll show you where I've got to. For a first attempt, I'm happy with how this has come out. There are a few patches that I do need to adjust, such as where the cork is showing through and the shoulders aren't quite finished, and areas clearly where the glue didn't quite catch, and therefore when I've hoovered up, it's left little gaps like this. But on the whole, particularly around the points, I think things are looking good. As with anything in this hobby, I've learned the more time you take to get things right, the better the final outcome. What's left for me to do is just touch up these little gaps that I've missed and then make sure everything is absolutely clean. I definitely need to make sure I remove any excess ballast, particularly around the frogs, otherwise the flanges of the wheels will catch and cause derailments. So a little bit of general tidying up off camera and I think I shall be in the position to run some locos. What is next for the layout, you may ask? Well, the way I see it, I've got to finish the scenery along the top, along my mountainside. I want to get some static grass, bushes and general vegetation. I've also got some small models such as sheep and livestock and possibly some people, which I may want to just put into the scene, although I think I will be coming back to that much later on once the general layout is complete. Beyond the scenery, I also need to work out what I'm doing on either end. On the end where I have the shunting side, I've always envisaged that being a kind of red brick tunnel opening and wall kind of retaining area, I'm not quite sure. And then over the top of the tunnel mouth, I obviously need to create some sort of scenic break, and I think that will be maybe some sort of road, and I can put some cars up there if there's enough space. On the other side, I just see that kind of opening out across the fields and maybe with some sort of landscape you can see in the background. Now, in terms of background, I do need to get my back scene in place. And I do already have a back scene which I have purchased from Rails of Sheffield, which I am going to fit. The plan was always to run it around all 3 sides, but taper off towards the front. So as you view the layout, you're actually seeing 3 sides in a boxed scenario. But I do have some reservations there, and that is that I really like to get low and down the layout and look across it from either end. One of my favourite shots is actually to come down and have a look around the rock face and just see the shed in the background, run a loco around that curve and let it come into focus. I think that just looks fantastic. So I'm not too sure whether or not I will be running that back scene down the sides. That's something perhaps you guys can leave a comment down below of this video and let me know whether you think I should be doing one or the other. Beyond the scenery, the back scenes, the ends, the bridge, I then just need to get the buildings back onto the board and add the final bits of finesse. So lampposts, little bits of machinery perhaps, a corner where I'm going to put some ballast and old material to make it look like an ex-working yard, and just generally bits and pieces to bring the whole scene to life. So hit that subscribe button, you know how this works. If you're interested in seeing me finish off this layout in the next 3 to 4 episodes, then please hit that and we will see you in the next video. Until then, it's been great having you. See you soon, everyone. Bye-bye.